A full-time job should lift you out of poverty. You shouldn't have to choose between rent or food, between childcare or transit. But many families in Toronto find themselves working for a wage that doesn't even cover the basics. That's where the idea of a living wage comes in. Unlike the minimum wage, which is an arbitrary floor under which no employer is allowed to pay, the living wage sets a higher test by asking what an employee needs to earn in order to afford the basics. No frills, just the basics. The living wage is different depending on where you live because it reflects the actual cost of living in your community. As an employer, you're not required to pay it, but a surprising number of employers are actually stepping up to become a living wage employer and to champion a living wage movement, a movement that is gaining momentum across the province. Employers like Duca, a credit union on Yonge Street in Toronto.
Oftentimes we view employment as what in that negotiation, what we can get away with the minimum. And looking at the financial practices of business, that's often the case. And yet businesses also have that same value of wanting to, or thinking and practicing that their employees are their biggest asset. Well, I think there's a tension in those values that has to be addressed. Not paying a living wage, it doesn't match for us. That's not fair.
Toronto's living wage was last calculated in 2008, but since then the cost of those non-negotiables has become more expensive. Things like childcare, rent, and transit, for example. Back then, we calculated the living wage at $16.60. Well, it turns out that Toronto's 2015 living wage is $18.52 an hour. That's how much two parents with two children need to earn in order to make ends meet. So your employer has decided to become a living wage employer, which means you're getting a raise. Can you tell us what impact that will have on your life?
Well, definitely I'm working two jobs right now. I recently got married, so having the higher living wage will definitely help. I won't have to work two jobs, so that's a great thing.
One of the things that surprised me in the calculation was the amount that people spend on laundry. But then we started, looking through what went into that number, and it's very true. And if anything, it's probably an underestimation. If you have young kids, you're probably doing more than that. I think, some of the numbers may jump out of you on paper, but once you look at, the assumptions that went into them and the frequency that they have to make that payment and the volume that needs to go into it, and the laundry is a perfect example of that. Life adds up very quickly.